Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate so deeply the opportunity to get together with this group of people. Amy was one of the folks who facilitated me even getting to know this amazing group. We've been having one or two conversations about some of these topics and how important they are to us. As Amy said, this is a continuation on a centuries-long struggle against colonialism and the imposition of a gender hierarchy that only allowed people to occupy one of two categories on behalf of a system that creates value for very, very few white men. We also got to talk a little bit about the implications for the work that we do in moving beyond this system of the gender binary and the patriarchy to envision what decolonization means to us as people all over and throughout the gender variant universe. And one of the things that I was especially excited to talk about last time in a more historical way and today in a more present way is the many people who have resisted, lived outside of, and sought to dismantle that exact binary from the perspective of being gender variant people who are fighting against colonialism, avoiding colonialism, surviving colonialism, et cetera. So we have a brilliant group of Black and Indigenous people who are coming to talk about those exact themes. So without further ado, we're just going to start off by introducing ourselves. One of the introduction questions that I find so important and useful is, who are you and who are your people? So that is our first question here. Who are you and who are your people? Randy, would you like to start us off?
I sure can. Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm gonna make sure I speak up too as well. My name is Randy Ford. I use she, her, goddess as pronouns. I am the development associate for the Lavender Rights Project here in Washington. And I'm also a part of the Washington Black Trans Task Force, which is one of our programs that we do. We are a buy-in for legal services organization with also a direct service component with our Black Trans Task Force, who's working on a housing project for Black femmes in King County, Washington, Black trans women and femmes. And who are my people? I am from a long generation of migrated slaves from Louisiana. Shout out to Elsie Mae Hall and Theodore Roosevelt Hall, my great grandparents. And also shout out to my dad's side of the family over in Michigan City, Indiana. I've lived in Washington my whole life, lived in Seattle. And so, yeah, I'm also identify as a non-binary trans femme. And I also am I must say, I'm a multidisciplinary artist as well. And I use my art to talk about my transformation and evolution and how intersectionality is key to doing this work of also decolonizing. So I'm very excited for this conversation. Do I popcorn or do we go clockwise?
Great question. I think for time, let's go clockwise. So right now I see Mahkyra next. So Mahkyra, who are you and who are your people?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you for starting us off with that, Malcolm. So my name is Mahkyra. I prefer to use no pronouns. I identify as non-binary. And it's kind of weird, but I also identify as kind of like a black hole. I'm very vast in my experiences. And I'm also slightly a mystery and very rare in sighting. I usually just stay at home a lot. And I am the programs manager or coordinator manager for Gender Justice League. And I am also the interim manager director for our Safe House program as well. And my people are my family, my mom, my sister, my aunt, my uncle. My people are also the oppressed people, marginalized people, Black people. I stand in solidarity with Indigenous people. I stand in solidarity with all people who are subjugated under settler colonialism. And yeah, that's me. Oh, hello.
Thank you, Mahkyra.
We can
Really happy that you're here with
now.
us. Exactly. Ara-Lei, please, off to you. Who are you and who are your people?
Thank you, Malcolm. Talafalava. My name is Ara Sifainu-Ulele Mahialani-Yandel. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Cultural Program Manager at the United Territories of Pacific Islander Alliance, which is Utopia, Washington. And who are my people? My people are Fa'afafine and Fa'atane, are queer and trans Pacific Islanders, and I bring them to this conversation this evening. They are an underrepresented group of people, and I hope to bring more understanding about my people to this conversation. I feel like there's always a lack of knowledge when it comes to Pacific Island gender identities, and tonight is one of those nights where we're going to learn a lot about that. And so in talking about my people, those are my people, Fa'afafine and the Fa'atane, the queer and trans-Pacific Islanders people, are who I bring to this conversation and who I'm a part of. So thank you so much. I'm so honored to be amongst this group and this collective. I'm so excited to have this conversation. It's been a long time coming. Thank you.
Thank you. So excited as well to have those communities brought in with us and sit with us here and be part of our discussion. Yes. Ganesha, last but not least, thank you so much. We're so excited to have you. The question that we're responding to is an introduction question. Who are you and who are your people? So off to you, Ganesha.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Malcolm. Hi, I'm Ganesha Gold Buffalo. My pronouns are her, she. My people are Choctaw, Cherokee, and Black folks. I come from a descendants of the lineage of enslaved folks out here in the Deep South, in the Smokies, and my ties are to this land in, of, and around the Smokies in Southern Appalachia, US, currently occupied territories. And our sacred lands are actually in the heart of the Smokies. That's where our creation stories come out of as Cherokee peoples. And it's just really good to be here today. My homeland is actually named after the Choctaw word for red rock. And I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Ganesha. As a way of introducing myself, I will also answer this question. I'm Malcolm. I am an activist. I used to identify as gender fluid, and I think I've been identifying more recently as a little bit more gaseous or plasma-like, like a different state of matter in terms of how I flow and turn around in gender. I'm a descendant of enslaved Africans in two different parts of this hemisphere, from both Turtle Island in the southeast, as well as the Arawak Taino territory of Jamaica. That is a huge part of who I am. I am really excited to be here. My people are descendants of enslaved Africans and Africans around the diaspora. My people are absolutely also people engaged in class struggle, engaged in gender struggle. My people are quickly becoming the people on this screen through the relationships and the conversations that we are having. So I'm excited to have my people be expanding in that way already. So I will end my introduction there so we can do some more expanding and talking together. So during our, I think, first conversations, one of the major themes that came up between all of us was how important and central youth leadership is and how important the vision and imagination and leadership of young people is in pushing us towards where we need to be. And so everybody astutely agreed, we came to consensus that that's where we should start, is by asking and talking about young people and youth. So the question for us here is, what have young people taught you recently about trans liberation? And where do you see young people pushing the edge of what we imagine is possible? So Ganesha, do you want to start us off here since you went last on the first question?
Sure thing. Sounds great. So as far as the youth go, that's something that's very close to my heart. When I started out in my own personal journey through spirituality and reconnecting with my ancestry, in doing so alone, as many of us do as Afro-Indigenous peoples here on, colonized lands in the U.S. or Turtle Island, as it's known to many Indigenous folks out here. I was taught initially by my elders and that people that were attracted to me to be teachers for me, that, the youth were central to all the work that we were doing and would ever do. And that was tied into creation and Afro and Indigenous futurism, stories that came out of those concepts as Indigenous peoples, dating all the way back, before colonialism, that focused centrally on the next 7 generations. And my work since then has focused centrally on the next 7 generations, particularly around building a future that they can inhabit and sustain, and building a future that they will actually, be alive for, and will be able to enjoy and root in, and, having a space and an environment, especially environment speaking to the natural environment, occurring within all things, and all things living on it. For them to actually live and build out communities of their own and planning of their own, futures of their own. And for me, the way that I root in that work is by constantly uplifting the work of youth, wherever I can, especially Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous youth, Black youth in this country. I was one of those youth when I was houseless on the streets of Nashville growing up, and pushing toward, a future for the youth that were around me, that were also on the street during that time, who were all LGBTQIA2S+. And, back then, like when I was 17, it was, a huge epidemic in my state of Tennessee of LGBTQIA2S+ youth just being thrown to the streets. And a lot of the housing accommodations that were built for youth of that community were being defunded and ousted from the community as well. So while they were at max capacity, those foundations and those efforts, they were at max capacity. They were also being systematically erased from the area. And all those youth, including myself, ended up on the streets together, and we formed very central organizing hives, if you will, to help us maintain our autonomy as youth on this, and to protect one another, and to keep each other fed, fed spiritually, psychologically, and physically. And I ended up taking that work on into the future, and went to Standing Rock with that work. And I was at Standing Rock for 4 months. And as many people may know or might not know, Standing Rock was actually an effort that was first brought into the public view and brought into organization by Indigenous youth. And it was led by Indigenous youth all the way through. And it was just so good to collaborate as a youth during that time with other Indigenous and Afro-Indigenous and Black youth at that location, with all those unified territories, all those unified peoples, all those unified clans and tribes. It was so good to have a space where youth were not only recognized and centered for their work, but were also recognized and centered simply for being and for being present. And that's a spirit that I would like to move through, all the work I continue to do in the future, but also all of my personal connections and all of my spiritual connections going forward into the future. Here's to the next 7 generations.
Snaps to that. Snaps to that. Let's just do a popcorn, because I feel like, who else wants to jump in here? How have young people been teaching you and leading you recently?
I guess I can go. There's been a surge of outspoken and unapologetic display of trans and identities amongst the younger generations. They've been pushing the boundaries of what our existence in modern society can and should look like. And it's quite beautiful to see our identities in that spotlight as of late, their existence in broad daylight, living their truths. I know quite recently we had Taking Back Black Pride, and to see the youth there interacting and just being their true selves was so empowering. There was nothing more heartwarming to me than to see our young people just thrive in that space. Their existence in broad daylight, living truth and out loud. People outside of our community need to realize that in itself is pushing the edge of what we imagine as possible. The dangers of ignorance we have faced in the past have not gone away. And our community faces consistent and unnecessary loss, but we have been fighting to gain traction in our visibility and pushing the boundaries of trans lives in these journeys, and it's through our young people that we continue to do so. There's also this consistent separation of generation, and I think that with the trans liberation movement, we have seen pioneers from various ages, backgrounds, and lived experiences. History has also shown us that it is our non-binary leaders who have been pushing the envelope for our existence and doing so unapologetically. For instance, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera, for example, current trans leaders today who cemented their work in trans liberation and by providing that visibility to youth, continuing to empowering them. Visibility because of perseverance has been one of our greatest triumphs, because I don't think the larger cisgender or heterosexual community understands just how many of our siblings have had to hide their truths. So to see young people just be liberated and free is such an empowering thing. The impact and unapologetic nature of young people who are fighting for the existing trans liberation is just a lesson and a clear picture of our resilience as a community and the dark history of what is taken to be here today, and a reminder of how much further we need to go as a collective.
Mahkyra or Randy?
I can go if Mahkyra is having technical issues and doesn't want to go. I know there's having a little spotty issues maybe. I echo everything that has been said thus far. Oh my gosh, definitely. Like the imagination that the youth have is, I think, just astounding. It's really unmatched almost when you think of like the time we're in, especially like the age of the internet and how they're just getting information to each other, just using also not just, the political everything, but also, images, just, you can see their souls. And I love it. Like you said, like seeing it in broad daylight, seeing it translated, we always, I'm a dancer, and there's, a a little bit of consensus around TikTok, and discrediting TikTok, and being like, oh, TikTok's not real dancing. But then it's like, hold up. The way these young people are using TikTok better than I could ever, even I'm 28, okay? And the way they are just surpassing so many professionals just by using a social media account, it's and then the trans leaders that use those, platforms and just really take it just to the next level. It's just really astounding. I'm looking at so many graphics and realizing young people made them, and like looking at these campaigns and young people are leading them. And so they're teaching me that, every day that, we're going to have to hand it off, and like have them run this, like actually run and trust them, to do so. And so like they're teaching me to like make sure I'm on my shit, making sure that I'm doing what I can to pass on something actually tangible for them to work with. Because when I think about what was passed down to me, it wasn't much. And so they're teaching me that time's a ticking, and we need to like really get it together, where it's July of 2021. Time is passing us by. And, the more we sleep on the youth, the more we are just not progressing. So they're teaching me that time's a ticking. It's now. Like we cannot be playing around, and so they be keeping a little fire under me, and I like it. And, and they're teaching me, as much as they're teaching me every day. As an educator, I love, and, I'm always one to collaborate with youth and like gauge how they are. What do you need? I don't want to tell you what you need. What do you need? And you just find out so much just by asking them, how are you? You'd be astounded by asking a youth how they are and what they say out of their mouth. And so they're teaching me all the things. They check me and I love it. They tell me, hold up, auntie. I'm like, oh, like I clutch my pearls every time. I'm just like, wow. Okay, get me together. You're right. That's my little spiel. I'm done.
Okay, it's my turn now. I'm sorry. I hope it wasn't too much of a pause. My audio and picture just got caught up. So the way that I want to answer this question, and hopefully you all can hear me, is when I think of youth, I think of the immense amount of weight and burden that specific community holds when facing a world that is inherently built to exclude them, and whether that be in death or in living life. Most recently, I have been thinking about the massive amount of unmarked grave sites found with Indigenous children, both in the UK, Canada, and here on Turtle Island, or also known as in a post-colonial setting, America, and how colonial settlers, when they first came to this landscape, knew of the importance that youth held, and bridging both the past, present, and the future in Native and Black communities, and how both Black and Indigenous babies were stripped away from their families and their homes and forced into a subtler reality where they were forced to or manipulated to deny who they were and had to pick up like a white mask and live a life that was not theirs and a life that they did not ask for. And specifically for trans liberation, the youth always remind me that we're born inherently with autonomy. And it's not something that you age into. It's not something that you secure with a certain job or when you reach a certain hierarchy that's interwoven with the society that we live in. It's that we're born as authentic beings, knowing who we are, knowing the path we are going to take. And that's not to say that we always have the language or the resources to express those things or the accesses to elders or ancestors that can help us guide us into that. But that we know who we are and that we understand now, and living in a post-colonial landscape, it's that oppression is what stops us from really fully realizing that. And I also want to give out, in terms of trans youth specifically, to Zaya Wade, is someone that comes to mind, and her elegance and her beautiful expression of authenticity, especially being a Black child with heterosexual cisgender parents, both of them being celebrities in the limelights. And I think it's really reflective of the changing world, and the youth always remind me of how much the world is changing and how much we need to keep up with it and change and adapt with it. And just her existence, Zaya Wade's existence in itself is pushing the edge. Just her breathing and her being allowed to be herself, and her authenticity is what's pushing the edge right now. So that's my response.
Thank you, Mahkyra, for that shout out to Zaya, especially. Really appreciate that. Especially, I'm really feeling so much of what you all are saying in terms of just how much pressure it feels like is what I was hearing you say, especially in Mahkyra, how much pressure and meaning gets put onto gender variant and trans and non-binary young people. Who are sort of thought of as new, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in people's minds. It's just a huge responsibility to carry, actually, in terms of bridging that past, present, and future. So really appreciate all of what y'all are bringing in terms of learning from them and also supporting and lifting them up, right? Exactly, Randy, as you were saying, to like leave something for folks to actually grasp onto and be able to use. So love that language. Thank you. It's an excellent connection to our next question, which is kind of about some of those pressures that many of our young people are facing as they are coming into this world and negotiating, learning, fighting against some of the rules, regulations, laws, bullshit, if I can say that, right? So in this context, I think Ara, is it okay if you start us off with this round? The question here is, what does colonialism mean to you? And how do you see colonialism as impacting the communities, trans, non-binary, and gender variant communities that you're a part of?
Thank you. Speaking from the communities that I am a part of, specifically as a Pacific Islander and Fa'afafine, colonialism has meant the ignorant and purposeful erasure of Indigenous practices and identities that did not fit the ideals and views of those Western and religious Christian powers that forced their control and influences over the Pacific Islands and over Pacific Islanders and their cultures. That sentence alone does not paint the full picture of what has been lost, erased, or forcefully eradicated from our cultures and Indigenous way of life. And the delivery, the diversity that once existed freely and openly, the harm the gender variant communities and individuals have faced are still very present today, and we're still facing them merely because of the ignorance and the hatred that comes with colonialism. Is quite frankly really disgusting. And as I stated earlier, resilience and perseverance have been the guiding light for our communities. And while we have lost large portions of true diversity of our existence and the normality of pre-colonial existence amongst our own larger cultural communities, we have also gained and grown from that loss with the surge of advocacy and activism from and for the trans community. There has also been a deep revival of our Indigenous identities outside of the binary, Fa'afafine and Fa'atane, in the manner of a woman, in the manner of, and it's more so of, there's no set destination in those identities. It's an ongoing journey between masc and femme and vice versa. And these exist in the islands of Samoa. You have the Whakaleitis in Tonga, the Two Spirits of Turtle Island, Wakasala-Walewa in Fiji, and Mahu of Hawaii, and so on. The existence of these identities today is a direct result and sign of our resilience and perseverance in the face of colonialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Ara. Who else would like to chime in here? What does colonialism mean to you, and how do you see it as impacting your communities?
I can go. What does colonialism mean to me? It's a lot of things. It's a lot of what Ara said, it's control. It's it's forced assimilation into ideals set for one type versus the many. I use goddess in my pronouns because I want to remind y'all that when they sailed to these lands, there were already religious leaders, healers, goddesses, deities among so many people, and they killed them off. And so it's just that, it's transphobia, it's transmisogenoir even, it's today, we still have it, and, shout out to Ganesha for always reminding us, within our organization that it's always going to be present, it's always going to be something that's going to be at the back, just right there with us, because it's so ingrained, they killed it. They tried to, kill it out, but again, we're still here, been here, thriving, doing it, doing the things, right? And even as someone who's non-binary, I like to even recognize that hormone replacement therapy is for some an assimilation. What if we lived in a world where we didn't have to, necessarily for protection, because again, body reconstructing is also something that's definitely or just a thing. That's fine. People can do what they want with their bodies, right? But when it comes to our safety, why are we doing this? Are we doing it because we're trying to get these people off our backs? Or are we trying to, really be true within ourselves? And so colonialism is always, it's just, we're born into it, it's the sin that we're born into, that is the sin, that is the toxic, that is the poison, colonialism. And so it's all of that for me. Colonialism is just, it's ever so here, it's ever so present, it's suffocating us. And, we need to air it out. We need to air it out because it's in our jobs, it's in our love lives, it's in our schools, it's in our programming, it's in our television, it's in the radio, it's in everything, it's everywhere. We cannot escape it. Even as someone, as liberated as I am, it's here. And we need to constantly be checking that and constantly interrogating that and constantly getting it from the root. Yeah. Ooh. Get a little shaky there when I got passionate. I'm sorry. Ugh, it's just it boils me, how colonialism was this horrible idea that a bunch of white folks decided to make a reality. And so I'm trying to make another reality, and believe in transliberation like they did colonialism, and really make that ever so powerful.
Thank you for that, Randy. I would just like to say that colonialism for me has a pretty broad definition and one that often leaves me triggered, and using triggered in the psychological terminology, to indicate CPTSD, of myself and my people, over such a long period of time. And that period of time of colonialism, I feel like a lot of us here, in Turtle Island and abroad, and when I say Turtle Island, I also mean Mexico, Canada, island nations, like all of those folks also use that terminology. It dates back for some of us, especially some of us, in other nations abroad, over 1,000 years. Here in, Turtle Island, we often use the language of the past 500 plus years, and it kind of leaves out a lot of history. It leaves out a lot of, unchecked boundaries of colonialism, unchecked, actions like genocides, epistemicides, etc. of colonialism, the way colonialism has impacted global communities. And I would just like to, address that first and foremost, especially, a shout out to my, Hindu peoples from which my name comes from, and their battles with, ongoing colonialism as it's occurred for the past, 1,000+ years as well. And, colonialism for me has been, I'll get like real for a second. Like for me, when I was growing up, colonialism looked a lot like, my first introduction to colonialism looked a lot like me waking up at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, every morning to sounds of my ancestors screaming from outside my window, coming from the ground, coming from the earth, and nature outside. Like waking me up to tell me that, like, hey, there's work to be done. There are things that haven't been overturned. There are things that haven't been addressed. And you are the one that's capable of doing it, and we're tapping you. We're tapping you because we know that you are capable. And we've been waiting for a long time through this bloodline for someone to come along who is capable of holding that as a vessel for this work, right? And I know, like, all of us have our own experience with that calling here today that are speaking, and those of us even, in audience. But that's what really radicalized me at a very young age, amongst many other things. Hearing those screams every morning is what really radicalized me, because there were things that most other folks around me, including my mother, could not hear. And there are things that they that did not affect those individuals in the same way. And I carried that. I followed those screams, into the woods as a child. My parents, didn't really like watch me very much. Didn't really watch me very much growing up. So I often wandered into the woods and was taught by my ancestors in those woods, in the forms of nature spirits, in the forms of elementals, in the forms of, natural deities and old gods. While I was out there, I was taught many things, and my mind was decolonized in that way from a very young age. They worked to decolonize me because they knew I was capable of me as that vessel, right, for this work. And so that was my introduction to decolonialism. Like, in coming into spaces that were supposed to be focused on decolonization was difficult for me in that way, because I came there from a very organic place in that way, of being taught by my ancestors in such a way that I wasn't exactly able to understand all of the language being used. I wasn't actually able to tap into a lot of the academic rhetoric that was there. And when I talk about academia, I also like to acknowledge that our academic system is colonial. Our academic system actually prevents many Indigenous peoples, particularly Black and Afro-Indigenous peoples, from gaining entry into educational spaces. But it also, like, in terms of like teaching positions, but it also prevents decolonial knowledge to be spread. There's so many systems of oppression within the academic system that keep it running, especially monetarily, financially, economically, that dictate what can be taught, what can actually be known in those spaces, what can actually be spoken about in those spaces. And if you go against that, you risk, disenrollment, you risk, being removed from those spaces, you risk abuse in those spaces. And that goes for every colonial space. And that's something that I definitely experienced myself coming into those spaces. So for me, colonialism is an entity. It's a massive entity. It's a force that moves through our worlds. A lot of, my native folks, including myself, like to call it the Black Snake. And it has roots in almost every system of power that you can think of. And it's done so very intentionally to remove those of us who are doing that actual work, to remove those of us that are actually tapped into the earth, that are agents of the earth, that are reflections and emanations and children of the earth. who actively work for it. From doing our work, we see often in the Amazon, especially, a lot of nature activists, a lot of climate and justice activists, etc., are murdered in those spaces. And even here on our lands, but especially there's a high bar tapped into the land that are working for the land. Folks that come from here and folks who are native to the area, both. And I know my community, my Indigenous activism community and organizing community has mourned a lot of losses over these past 5 to 10 years, of those individuals that were out there doing that, like climate justice and environmentalism work. And it's important that we know that so that we can gauge the level of importance of this work. This is so important that we have these, colonial corporations paying massive amounts of money for these individuals to be murdered, for them to be removed from the earth, in terms of the work that they're doing and their voices. And it really puts into perspective how important the work that we're doing around not just environmentalism, but decolonialism is, and that we keep talking about it, that this continues to be a conversation that we're not only moving in digital spaces, but in physical spaces, not only in organizing and activism spaces, but in our families, and within our friend groups, within our social spaces in general, within our academic spaces, even, at whatever cost that might equate to. For us individually, and we're bringing decolonialism, especially as it applies to intersectional politics, into our identities in every aspect of our life, especially when we're, fighting for autonomy and moving for the continuation and the protection of our autonomy that we are birthed with, but that colonialism tends to chip away at over time, the longer that we're here. In this space, in this colonial space. But it's also really important to just acknowledge that the earth in of itself is decolonized, that colonialism cannot touch this land, it cannot touch our spirits, and it cannot touch our essences as Indigenous, Afro-Indigenous, Black peoples, African peoples. Thank you.
Thank you. You've brought up so many really concrete manifestations of colonialism in terms of how it has impacted people, how it has impacted you in terms of how you think about it. I think you've given us some really concrete examples of institutions as well that are just examples of colonialism, the academy, housing, you were talking about philanthropies, you were also talking about environmental regulations in Brazil. There was so much there that I'm trying to just highlight some of the really deep stuff you brought out about these interconnections. There's absolutely a reason, right, that colonialism is impacting gender variant communities, and that gender variant communities oftentimes happen to be at the forefront of some of these environmental struggles that you have named and some of the other struggles. So really appreciate those connections being woven. Mahkyra, anything that you would like to add here?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad that I caught that part. And I just agree with what everybody has said before me so far. There was bits and pieces that I got to hear in there, and then everything that y'all were saying, I was just like, yes, 100%. I agree with that. And so some of what I'm about to say might be a little bit repetitive. But these are just my thoughts and my answers. So colonialism to me it's genocide, it is land theft, it is linguisticide, if that's the word, the destruction of languages, it's femicide, it's homelessness, it's redlining, it's gentrification, it's domestic violence, it's patriarchy, it's incarceration, it's diet culture. It's eating disorders. Colonialism has a direct impact on our relationships with not only our bodies, but our minds, the land, and our food. Malcolm, as you said earlier, this binary thinking, this boy, girl, this black and white, this othering that we do is very colonial. Randy, I'm really glad that you brought up love life, because I think colonialism in this landscape in particular is just all about white desirability. It's about white safety, white privilege. It's generational wealth. And I see it every day in my communities in particular. I see it in like suicide rates. I see it in toxic masculinity. I see it in the deaths of trans people daily. I see it in police brutality and improper care in medical institutions. And I'll just close really quickly with, as Randy said, it's everywhere, and it impacts our everyday lives and every single aspect of our lives. And yeah.
I'm actually going to toss it back to you again, Mahkyra, to start us off for this next question, because you're already pivoting into it, right? Which is, what does decolonization mean to you? What is this, if we're talking so specifically about how colonialism impacts us, we started off by talking about what the alternative reality it is that Goddess is trying to construct over here, Randy, right? That you were talking about. What's the alternative reality? What does decolonization mean to you, Mahkyra? And how do you see decolonization moving in your communities?
So, sorry, what was the question, Malcolm? You cut off a bit there.
No problem. Sorry about that. It's just, how do you see decolonization moving in your communities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, I see it in just like the littlest things of just in the movements, especially with Indigenous sovereignty movements, whether it be in terms of like reparations or it being awareness around residential schools and educating people and what happened in those schools. I don't really think there's a lot of knowledge around like what happened in that particular time in history and the impacts that it has in contemporary times. I see it in movements for reparations. I see it in the Black Lives Matters movements. I see it in the movements to push critical race theory in our schools, even though they banned it, while also officially making Juneteenth an official holiday. And so I see it in communities of color in particular, being driving forces and creating pathways for liberation and educating folks on the history of what colonialism is and how its impacts have trickled down into current day history. And so, yeah, it's me.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, tossing it out, who'd like to hop in here to the double Dutch that we're creating?
I guess I'll help my way in. Mahkyra, you brought so many great points, and I'm thankful for you voicing those. But I'm speaking through a Pacific Islander lens. Decolonization is the act of undoing colonialism. For my communities, it means the reintroduction and solidification of our diverse identities in our culture and our cultural Indigenous practices, protocols, society in general. And as beautiful as that may sound, it's a steep uphill battle for us. Colonialism has polluted the minds of our own Indigenous people, and so ignorance and fear are alive and well. We confront it every day. As Ifafafine specifically, we've had to silently protest and slowly insert our existence into Samoan life by the way of irrefutable and undeniable service to our communities. This is the way we protest. And we are the cultural bearers and the practitioners, the keepers and the pioneers of artistic expression. Our churches and communities look up to us for cultural design, aesthetic opinions, and to be leaders in cultural and religious performance. the poetic justice of this way of service is that while we align ourselves with the cultural practice of respect and acknowledgement to heritage that is unique to the Samoan way of life, it is also the same way that we are protesting that ignorance towards our existence and exposing the diversity of our identities and the abilities to our very own Indigenous identities, such as Fa'afafine and Fatane, and especially those who identify as trans women and also being Fa'afafine. Thank you.
I just wanted to hop really quick and just add a bit to what I said. Thanks to Ara, I'm really, realizing some things that I missed out on saying. Thank you, Ara. So for me, like decolonialism definitely means it's also like a multi-pronged like subject. I know, for myself, like being two-spirit, is in essence in like claiming that not just the title of two-spirit, because two-spirit itself is only around 30, 40 years old. Like it's not, the term itself is not very old, but it was invented to give Indigenous peoples a sense of reclamation over their people and over their most sacred peoples, as those peoples were considered to be one with creation, one with creator, with spirit, with great spirit. Great spirit being the creative force that moves through all things, the life force that moves through all things, and the universe and the cosmos as well. And like for me, especially like I thank you, Mahkyra, for bringing up the residential schools. For me, that's been a difficult subject to touch on, just because the more I've gone into Indigenous spaces, I've definitely felt the mounting generational trauma around residential schools, and how that affects Indigenous peoples. I know that a lot of Indigenous peoples don't talk about residential schools because they're waiting on their elders to talk about it. And their elders are so traumatized by having gone through residential schools that they don't yet feel comfortable doing that, many of them. Many of them have already tried to and have been silenced for it, have been shut down, have been invalidated. So we have a lot of, a lot of grief and a lot of trauma that moves through and prevents that subject from reaching communities, that prevents that subject from reaching the ears of, other organizing bodies, that prevents it from reaching other communities, right? And prevents those communities from interacting, communicating with one another about their histories with residential schools, their respective histories with residential schools. It was also that, during this period when we have this news coming out about the residential school children found, buried underneath these facilities or near these facilities, it's important to know that this is something that Indigenous communities the world around have always known about, and that, a lot of Indigenous knowledge is passed through verbally, and it's passed through, through communication, and that Indigenous peoples have many forms of communication that are also nonverbal, right? A lot of which being, what we consider today to be psychic. There's a lot of forms of Indigenous communication that have been, covered over or muddled due to colonialism, so that we're not able to witness them in their glory. But a lot of folks in the community, as this news was coming around, were talking about how, while it's good that the knowledge was getting out there and that, more people outside these Indigenous communities were actually getting this knowledge, finally, it was actually being broadcasted on national news, how good that was. In the same turn, it was also really difficult for these Indigenous communities who were very triggered through, generational trauma, to have to see this, all up and down their news broadcasts and timelines and feeds. And you know, seeing that in their inbox, and all of these people who were, you know, not of their community or non-Indigenous, like sending them messages being like, did you know this? Did you know about this? How about this? And like, and it was like, of course they knew. Of course they knew, but it's such a nuanced and difficult subject to touch upon given the level of trauma, because when we talk about colonialism, right? We're talking, and as it applies to this subject, we're talking about, you know, very intentional eradication and separation of the children from Indigenous communities in order to end those communities, in order to end, you know, cultural practices, in order to end, you know, Indigenous, you know, resilience, in order to end these folks' way of being and their outlook on the future, which was, you know, central to their entire belief systems going forward. It was an intentional, you know, subduing of Indigenous communities to make Indigenous peoples, especially those who were not children or were parents of the children, to give up hope entirely, so that they would be more easily controllable. That trauma, it lasts several generations, and you know, given that colonialism has also separated us from our healing practices in a lot of ways, and that we're just now finding, a lot of us are just now finding our reconnection to those healing modalities. It's also a way of silencing us, right? So we cannot talk about it, so that those conversations cannot move. So while you know, these communities, while we're very glad for this news coming out, it's also a burden. And, you know, I want that to be known, you know, as something that my elders especially are saying right now. Just, you know, keep people reminded that this is a trauma, it's a burden for us. As you know, thank you for listening to that part. But just as a two-spirit individual as well, I consider our existence to be decolonial in origin, because our peoples, as you know, Ara was mentioning, like our peoples in a lot of ways, and from varying cultures, and each culture, each tribe, each nation has its own name for the two-spirit people as well, as something to keep in mind. But we were the, you know, the frontliners. We were the folks who, you know, grew the food a lot of times. We were the folks that, you know, initiated ceremony a lot of time. A lot of ceremonies were not allowed to happen without a two-spirit person at the forefront. In a lot of spaces, two-spirit people were actually suspended over the entire area in trees, with rope, with all sorts of machinations, in order for them to be above, overlooking the ceremony as an eagle. An eagle being one of our sacred animals in many of our Indigenous nations. And, you know, as two-spirit people, you know, our duties continued to be that even after colonialism. When colonialism came through, a lot of Indigenous nations actually would take two-spirit people and hide them, sneak them into the ceremonies, because they were no longer allowed, thanks to colonialism, to be in those ceremonies. The folks, the elders especially, that knew the importance of them being there, would sneak them into the ceremonies, would sneak them behind the gates of the ceremonies into the treetops for them to oversee those ceremonies, to make them sacred, to keep them sacred. And so a lot of our ways are not sacred without us being present. So for two-spirit people, you know, decolonialism is in our origins. It's in our blood in that way. It's in the way that we breathe and move in the world. You know, when I was at Standing Rock, I just remember situations of, you know, domestic abuse, like happening, you know, in camp. And we were actually called in as two-spirit people to mediate those situations, because that was our way before colonialism. That was our way in many nations before colonialism, was to come in and mediate relationships and relational trauma, familial trauma. We were the ones that brought others together, not only through love, but also through relation, through blood, right? We brought folks together and reminded them of their place in the land. reminded them of their duty to the land, as their duty to one another, and as to their, you know, they're the global nations as well, and to spirit, and you know, there's a lot of trauma in that, right, that we have to carry, as folks who are, you know, carrying such a rich origin and a rich history, and, you know, carrying a torch for spirit on this land, as vessels. And I hear like a lot of conversations today, like around resilience, and I would just like to inject for whoever's watching that, like, you know, it's okay to not be resilient. It's okay to be in pain, and it's okay to hurt deeply and to need support around that. Your pain should always be held, and if it's not being held by those around you in your community, that is not your community. That is not your people. I suggest finding other people. I suggest finding other people and going where spirit guides your heart to find, because your pain deserves a home. Thank you.
Whew, oh my goodness. I can go right after that. Wow, Ganesha, you really got chills on my whole body going right now. Like, thank you so much for all of that. That was so powerful. And just thank you. Thank you for the reminder. All of you, thank you. Honestly, we've been spitting that knowledge. Oh my gosh. Mahkyra, I really love that you said reparations, you know, reparations. I don't know if y'all missed the drama, but we had an event that had a little tussle over some reparations, and people were looking at us like, this wasn't the thing you're supposed to do. You know, you want to look at our pain, look at our celebration, look at our joy, and, you know, get turned on by it for what? Yeah, pay, okay? Like, you get to pay to play. So yes, decolonization is reparations. It's also abolition. You know, it is destroying the current broken system and really using our imagination to create again a whole new utopia. And just, you know, it's the act of undoing, you know, it's pouring into yourself, you know, it's treating you know, yourself like your partner, you know, like the person you love most. You know, that's decolonization. We're not told to love ourselves the way we're supposed to. You know, we're supposed to be inferior. For what? For what? No, that's colonialism. That's an arrogance. That's an entitlement to you thinking that you're better than me. No, decolonization is speaking our mind, and, you know, it's making mistakes. It's repairing. Decolonization is, you know, again, uprooting, not putting a Band-Aid over, uprooting. It is white people stepping down and aside, like step down, but also step aside. You know, hand this over to the indigenous peoples that they're supposed to have. Hand this over to the women and femmes and trans women and two-spirit people who, again, continuously run this shit from behind this curtain. Okay, everyone's front stage, but everyone doesn't know that there's a whole tech team backstage, making sure everyone on stage is in their proper spot, going to where they need to go. Okay, you know what I mean? Like, let's talk about it. You know, like, it is literally stepping down, realizing that this is never going to work the way we're supposed to imagine it to. It's not. No, people are making money off of us. People are making money off of prisoners. People are making money off of our death. People are making money off of our joy more than us, you know? And it's no. Decolonization is us realizing our power, reimagining our power, and also giving ourselves space to also not be that badass bitch all the time. Yeah, like, actually, I do want to shrivel up in a corner and just be, you know, helpless, useless, you know, whatever. Sorry, that's ableist, not even useless, because what is that? You know, my grandmother, we talk, and, you know, she gives me the proverb every time. And, you know, sometimes it, you know, but this one stuck so hard. And she said, am I really doing nothing when I'm just sitting and looking at the trees and just trying to enjoy my day? Is that really me doing nothing? Is that really me not trying to rest and restore and find peace, find calm, meditate, talk to myself, check in? Is that really doing nothing? You know, we put such, you know, we put so much, I'm guilty of it, so much worth on our labor, you know, and so much worth on what we're doing for people, and so much worth off of, you know, awards and stuff. And it's like, can we just live? Yeah, it's astounding. I'm learning so much literally in real time right now. I'm just like, oh my goodness, like it's all of it. Decolonization is, yes, can we just live? That's what, like, I just want to live. I just want to enjoy my time without somebody bugging me about why I look the way I do. Mind your business. That's decolonization also. Mind your business. Why are we always trying to police people? Okay, find some business, as Tabitha Brown said, okay? Like, mind your damn business. Leave it alone. Not everything is for you, okay? Not everything is for you. There are even spaces, I'm like, that's not for me. You know what I mean? Like, this, there are certain times where we need to know when and when not. And just thinking that we just can enter everything and get all that we want, you know, and conquer the world, it's just like, no, I'm cool, sis. So absolutely, it's all of that. It's all of that. And thank y'all. Y'all are fueling me like no other right now. I hope y'all know, like, oh my goodness, like, thank you so much.
I just want to like have a praise break or something, almost like just put on some organ music in the background and we can all just run around in a circle for a second. Thank you so much for this ceremony and this healing. All of what you all are saying is just so, I feel extra space in my chest when I hear you all speaking this truth, right? The Ara, that phrase that you use, that undeniable presence, right? That comes through community service, and that comes from knowing that certain ceremonies cannot be sacred if you are not present. There's something so just powerful about that, about knowing that this is a legacy that's been stolen from us, but that doesn't make it less powerful. That actually the mythologies that are given to us by white supremacy about our communities, in fact, being backwards or uncivilized or even sometimes more homophobic or transphobic, remain untrue, because the reality that you're surfacing, Ganesha, is that our communities, as part of their resistance and resilience, have also defended our existence, our participation, our presence consistently as part of the life ways and part of the culture ways that help us survive. Really appreciating as well that just like the clarity that reparations and land back, right? Indigenous people are not going around saying hashtag more funding, are not going around saying like hashtag more visibility. Actually, it's land back. And there's a reason for that, right? Because if you don't have the trees, then you can't be the eagle, right? So these are the connections that we are really just, I'm so just thankful, so grateful, so grateful. When you're talking about, Randy, when you're talking about needing to abolish certain things, when you're talking about needing to dismantle and acknowledge what needs to be dismantled and what needs to be held on to, this leads into actually the last question, which I think is one that sometimes we argue about, sometimes we don't argue about, but is gender really kind of one of those institutions that we might have to dismantle or abolish in order to move forward, right? So does gender deserve the same fate as colonialism? Is struggling for decolonization necessarily hoping for an end to gender? Or Randy, would you say your vision is something different? So I'd love for you if you could start us off on this subject. Yeah, what do you think about this? Is it gender abolition, or are we talking about something different here?
You know, this question, I thought about it when it got sent to me. I was like, ooh, they're going there. again, identify as non-binary, trans femme. Those are English words for the closest thing to describe what's inside of me, right? They don't match up 100%. Nothing has ever matched up 100%. And for the longest time, I never knew why the word gay never fit me, even though people kept putting that onto me, as I'm just floating through life, doing what I do. There was always that question, like, are you gay? And it's like, why? Like, do you just want to know? For what purpose besides just knowing? When I coming into my transness, I realized, I wasn't a boy that liked other boys this whole time. I was never a boy. Like, I was never, ever, 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 ever a boy. I was assigned that role and it did not fit. And I was not going to put that on. My mom told me never to put on shoes that are too small. They're bad for your feet. And so I never, ever, ever, ever fit there. And I don't fit within women either. There we go. I don't see myself as 100% woman, even though I use trans femme, trans woman interchangeably all the time. I take hormones so that I have breasts, so I can appear whatever a way so you can, again, interpret what my soul is. But if I were to tell you like, oh yeah, I want to be called non-binary trans femme my whole life. No, I don't. I just want to be called Randy, Aisha, those, whatever I want you to call me, mommy, queen, daddy, if I want you to. And so, like, yes, I do think the abolition does include this gender construct. Why are we dividing people like this? Why are we causing this competition? And this is like, they always say that when you put genders against each other, like, boys versus girls, whatever, and you separate people like that, you actually heighten gender violence among those groups. And that was the weirdest thing I ever imagined. Like, oh my goodness, because I was, for a long time, I was all for the gender. I was all for, this and that, and fighting for, this right to be called a woman, this right for these pronouns, this right to, dress and express the way I do. But then again, it's like, well, if all I'm doing is this is just inciting more wars, then yeah, I don't want it. Like, I don't need it. Like, I don't need gender if it's going to mean that other people are going to die. That's also decolonization. I don't want my joy to be at the expense of other people, to be at the deaths of other people. I don't want to be stepping on anyone's neck, in order to have power. And so, yes, and gender is a power construct so that men, male, whatever, can control everyone else. Because again, they saw that the matriarch was running the shit. And so what do, to make them think that they're inferior? It's like just dividing them and then telling who gets to go into what. Like, why are we telling people who gets to, like, why? I don't get it. So even as a non-binary trans femme, even as a trans woman, I definitely see that those words, this language, it's ugh. No, we need to be, I want to see people, my young people, when I would bring up pronouns, they would come up with Wakanda, they would come up with Pokemon trainer, they would come up with whatever was on their heart. And I was like, that is the world I want to see, where we're calling ourselves cyborgs. We're calling ourselves whatever we need in order to feel good about ourselves. Like, why can't we just feel good about ourselves and affirm ourselves, and then people respect that? So yeah, I definitely think gender needs to go. And let me see, is it too many? Yeah, it's just, it's one of the things. It's one of the things, this is going to be an ongoing cycle and ongoing journey. And I just hope I can always continue to be a step towards that. Cause trying to fight the good fight, but this lifetime is only so short. So I just hope that eventually that we just get so close to the world that we actually want to see. Shout out to AU Collective for that. So just thank you. This has been amazing. I cannot wait to hear you all as well. Oh my God.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much. Yes, that's the exact way we need to start off on this tip, right? So If we're talking about the universe, and there might be one pole that's love it and another pole that's list it, you're on the list it side of gender. Okay. So what are some of the other opinions that are floating around here? What do y'all think? What is our vision? What is the vision that y'all see when you think of decolonization? Does it include a future with gender, or a future without gender, a future without the gender binary, or something different, something more? Please.
I know initially when the questions were sent out, the question was, is gender worth decolonizing? And does it deserve to be liberated from colonialism? I kind of struggled with that question. I felt it was tricky. And like Randy, I just want to live in a world where, if I call myself a unicorn, I'd be that. And people will be well with that. But also, I think that question personally should have been reframed. Colonialism has never served the communities impacted by its disservice. We can argue until the sun sets on how colonialism has done things to advance aspects of society that those who have been impacted by it benefit from. But the main point is that colonialism has always been an act of violence and oppression. It has done the violent work towards erasure and eradication of anything and everything that did not or does not fit its values and norms. So pre-colonial gender expression, identity, and its diversity has suffered. The bodies and souls that embody those identities have suffered a great deal. And I know this as a Pacific Islander. It is every bit worth decolonizing, and we deserve liberation in every form it should come in. It is not a question of whether gender deserves to be liberated or liberated from colonialism. It should never be that question. People need to know why it deserves to be liberated and what it looks like before, what it looked like before the notion that it needed to be liberated from oppression, ignorance, and attempts at erasure because of the impact of colonialism. Those are my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ara, for that. That was amazing. Amazing. And that it's a perfect segue into what I wanted to say around my experience with this question. I want to just lead into it by saying that in the same way that some folks were talking about earlier, we had advanced societies, advanced indigenous societies prior to colonialism. We had our own systems of technology and technological advancement. We had everything that we needed to be in right relationship with one another and with the land. And that was our main priority, was that we were in right relationship. And that narrative has shifted, since colonialism, absolutely 100%. We have a lot of other priorities that don't necessarily come into our sense of relationship with all things, particularly with ourselves or our community as an extension of ourselves. For myself, especially this question, in the spirit of what Ara was saying, it kind of hit me a certain way as well, because I would like to remove the deserve language from the way we speak about colonialism. Deserve language is inherently colonial. And because indigenous folks knew prior to colonialism and understood kind of naturally one another as inherently deserving of certain things, but not just deserving, but requiring of certain things. And when we had, say, a folk someone in the community with disability, it was like from the point of their birth known what that individual would need, and it was just given to the individual. You know, like there was no like council decision about that. There was no like merging of minds. There was no brainstorming. Like we developed it, we figured it out if we didn't have it, but it was often already known what that individual needed and was supplied immediately. And we had the technology and the understanding of, you know, ourselves as extensions of nature in its diversity, and in its biodiversity to do that, and how to build those mobility devices. And I would say, like, in the same way that, like, you know, everything deserves to be liberated from colonialism. There's nothing that does not deserve to be liberated from colonialism. Everything requires liberation from colonialism, and it's the work of everyone here and the elders and the folks that we've learned from in and out of our communities that furthers that initiative and that narrative. That's so much more than a narrative. That, you know, everything is requiring of decolonization, and we've committed our lives to that work, both like individually and respectively, given our origins, given our people. For gender, myself, it's been a constant, you know, struggle under colonialism, not to accept and affirm myself, but to find acceptance and affirmation and understanding outside of myself in a colonial society. I grew up loving myself very much, loving what I saw in the mirror very much, very euphoric about my future and my final form very much. It was colonial society that influenced me to hate myself, to separate and fracture parts of my identity, to separate and fracture parts of my reflection and how I saw myself and how that self related to everything else around me and the relationship to myself and to the land. And I just wanted to speak that into existence because it's very real for me even to this day. I really see all gender dysphoria as being a product of colonialism. I definitely see it as being something, you know, central to myself and my own identity. I 100%, you know, want to still be able to look in the mirror and see every part of myself as a woman, see every part of myself as a two-spirit, you know, trans woman, a beautiful being. My mustache, you know, all of my facial hair, my untrimmed brows, you know, like my fat ass, like my belly, my big dick, like, you know, everything. I want to be able to see every part of myself as a woman, because that's exactly what I am. That's what I saw myself when I was closest to spirit as a child, and that's what I will see myself as before I depart into the next world as an elder. Thank you.
I can answer next. That's all right. Okay, so with this question, I'm a little bit torn on it. I definitely agree with what Ganesha and Ara was saying, in that gender does definitely need to be decolonized. Everything needs to be decolonized if we're going to make pathways for complete and total liberation for folks and their bodies and their minds and their spirits. But when I think of this question, I was thinking of what we were discussing in a previous setting. If gender deserves to continue to like exist as itself as the way it is now. And a part of me is like torn on it. And I think that's okay for this moment, but I just think the answer is very nuanced and it's very individual and depends on like your experience and the communities and the culture that you're coming from. But for me, I believe that gender can be very beautiful, but also very catastrophic. Like it's a very like fine line. And it's beautiful in the sense that in its expression and its art and its liberation, it can be very beautiful. I think of drag queens. If Bob the drag queen ever sees this, hi Bob, I love you. I love drag queens. So I think gender, like in that way, when it's fully liberated, can be like a very beautiful art form. You know, but it's also very catastrophic, as like we heard before. Very horrible in its power dynamic and in its oppression. As was mentioned before, gender, like this word that we're saying, gender it's in English. It's a colonial language, it's a colonial word. And with it comes a binary that backs it up. And it'll always be toxic to me. And we can try to reshape it and we can mold it and we can fit it to our bodies as a way to adapt and to survive. But at least like in my heart and my soul, it's never going to be fulfilling. There's always going to be that underpinning power relation treading behind it. And as Randy said, I also identify as non-binary. It's just that word is the closest thing that I can pick out of this, like the vocabulary that represents the soul in which I carry in this body. So I believe that we can strive to decolonize gender, and it does need to be decolonized in each and every way. And as I mentioned before, colonialism really influences the way, and I think Ganesha was also getting with this with body dysmorphia, it really connects or influences how we connect with our bodies and the knowledge of our bodies and our position in the society with the bodies that we're born with. And it's influenced by white supremacy as well, whether it be like with plastic surgery. I believe someone like brought up hormones before, or just trying to mold our bodies in a way that's acceptable and palatable to the white gaze is how I take it. So, and it even like on a personal level, it like for me, gender really influences like how I connect with my hair. Like as a Black person, you know, I'm always just like trying to keep up, and I feel like as a femme presenting person too, like there's always this pressure to like always keep up with like my appearance and the clothes I wear and all of these things, and it's just like I'm tired. Like I just want to like exist, as people were saying before, like not have to worry about like how society is going to perceive me based off of like what my physical body looks like. So I think it's definitely a nuanced, you know, answer when we're answering this question. I think it's a conversation that we keep having to push forward, and we need to bring in as many like perspectives and epistemologies into this conversation, because I know some folks really love gender. Like again, drag queens. There's a lot of like trans folk who love their gender as well, who love identifying as being transgender, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. But I think when it comes to the components of white supremacy and colonial settlerism, because I also think of like cis heterosexualism and how that was definitely like a strategic move and definitely forced, as before, like when colonial states were just beginning to form, you know, folks were traveling, like folks didn't really stay in like one spot. And so the government really needed a way for folks to continue to reproduce the society. And so they wanted folks to settle down one area, have kids, and continue this lineage of white supremacy. And so I think that, yes, let's decolonize gender as we know it now, because I don't think, even in its beautiful reflections, I don't think it's serving a massive amount of people, and it's causing a lot more harm than it does good. But again, I don't think there's one answer to this. You know, there's not one answer. There's like it's multifaceted. I think, as Ganesha was mentioning before too, it's multi-pronged. And so I think it's just a conversation that we have to keep on having and to keep on discussing. So I'm glad that we brought this up. I agree with you, Ara. When I saw this, I was like, oh, we're going there. Yeah, like we're getting to that piece. So I'm glad that we're ending with this. And yeah, let's keep on talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahkyra. Yeah, thank you all. The amount of humility that has, the amount of open-endedness that has, the amount of courage and strength that it takes to be like, actually, this is not a binary. Actually, everything deserves to be colonized. Actually, this sense of entitlement is colonial. Like that kind of clarity is just so important, and it feels like as well so grounded and rooted in some of the political stances that you all have been tracing throughout this conversation, right? Of really acknowledging things as interconnected, is really acknowledging things as open-ended, of actually denying binaries totally. So if the question says yes or no, the answer is clearly not only a both and, but more, as you're rightly offering and astutely offering, Mahkyra. Yeah, isn't that the point of all this? Yeah. So we have, now we are supposed to transition into a Q&A portion. Before that, I wanted to just hand things over. Actually, there are ways to open and ways to close, and both of them are, I think, important. So even though Ganesha wasn't able to do the land acknowledgement at the beginning, and we had a land acknowledgement at the beginning that Amy did, I think it's also important to bring that full circle and close with the land acknowledgement as well. Ganesha, are you feeling ready and still feeling it here?
100%.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm handing off to you then. Great.
Yeah, so thank you, everyone here, all my relations, all my people for being here today. It's, so good to be here and speak on these issues of decolonialism that we're approaching and facing in our everyday as, Black, Afro-Indigenous, and Indigenous peoples the world over, not just here in Turtle Island. Thank you for, your undivided attention, for sitting with us through our process, because, as I stated earlier, colonization is trauma, and speaking about our trauma is difficult, and it's always going to be very difficult. The ways in which this trauma has fractured our identities and our minds is always going to creep up as we talk about it, and we have to actively work through that as we're speaking about these things. We're working on our wording. So thank you for acknowledging that and understanding that and being patient with us along the way. In my way, in Indigenous communities, we come into every space introducing ourselves and introducing the land that we're on. And that's called a land acknowledgement in a lot of communities now. So I'd just like to go ahead and do a land acknowledgement for all of our stationed areas, respectively. So for the land that's now referred to as Washington, which is not Washington, it is unceded Coast Salish peoples land, specifically the first people of Seattle Duwamish land. For New York, Lenapehoking, or the land of Lenape, offspring of the Algonquin civilization. It was the largest urban native population in the US present day. For where I am in Tennessee, Choctaw for Red Rock. It's Choctaw and Challis territories. And its indigenous peoples are still here today in reservations and outside of reservations even more so. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. And thank you for decolonizing with us today. And I hope you'll take this work and all of this information forward into your respective communities and really own the duty of, full subscribing and admitting to decolonization in your personal lives, in your work communities, in your organizing and social communities, and in the communities that are essential to your race and origin. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for moving with us, and let's keep doing this. Let's keep moving this forward into the future, into our unified Afro and Indigenous futures. Let's do this.
Yes, to the unified Afro-Indigenous future. Thank you so much, Ganesha. I so appreciate that. I wish that folks who are tuning in could see all the love and appreciation that's flowing in our panelist chat here to one another. There's just a lot of love and appreciation and admiration that's flowing between us. So now we do have time for a couple of questions, but I know that people sometimes need time to think of them and type them. So I have a buffer question. And then if we don't have any questions by the time y'all get to respond to that question, then we can, wrap up and go live our lives in all caps. Go live our lives. So the question that I have is a follow-up question to some things that have been coming up. And I'm going to ask this question. In the meantime, those who are tuning in, you can go ahead either on any of the platforms that you're on, you can go ahead and type those questions into the Q&A and they'll pop up here and we'll be able to see them. In the meantime, I wanted to ask more about how we split this difference or find this balance between finding our roles in our communities and having a central role in our communities, and also maintaining our boundaries in societies that ask so much of us, right? So what are some of the ways that you all are finding ways to healthily establish your place and your role in community, while also making sure that you're supported to have boundaries that help you sustain yourself and your community?
For me, this is a really important conversation topic on healing, right? Because, and how we're approaching healing in our individual lives, especially those of us who are, figures in organizing spaces and activist spaces, and, for those of us whose work often intersects with our lives, and whose lives often intersect with our work. I think that, forming the boundaries of those and the lines of those is imperative to healing, because we often overwork ourselves, especially as, queer, Black, Indigenous peoples, specifically. And I think overwork, as that relates to burnout, it's a conversation also that we're having a lot in our respective communities right now. I see popping up a lot on social media. I see popping up a lot in, respective organizations and different board meetings, and people bringing up individually for themselves, both to their respective communities and their orgs and partner orgs and, work environments and places that they're in, to try to advocate, for space and time for their own individual healing. And the more that we talk about healing and what that means to us, and the decolonial origins of that for each of us, individually and collectively as well, the more this topic is going to come up of like, how are we taking care of ourselves, right? How are we healing ourselves? For me personally, it's very much centered around how much time I'm spending in nature, how much time I'm connecting with the land as body, how much time I'm really, reunifying myself with those Indigenous concepts, and how I'm, I myself am like pushing myself out of the container of my home, out of the container of my room, out of the container of my workspaces, in which to feel fully embodied in those natural spaces, and in those places where I can actually soak up that healing, and get those downloads, as I like to call them, into my being, by being with those trees, by being with those plants, by being with that grass and the nature inhabitants, the animals, and hearing them, being close to them. There's currently a rabbit in our yard who has made a home in our yard, and we thought it was a child. We thought it was a very young rabbit because it was playing with itself often. It didn't have a community of its own, and that's how it found home here. And it's kind of living under a used car of ours. And my mother just discovered today it was actually a mother rabbit, and it had children underneath the car. And it needed our space for sanctuary because it knew it was safe here. And that's what I'm talking about when I like to talk about healing, is that the more you focus on healing for yourself personally, the more it ripples out to not only your family, but the natural environments and the animals and the ecosystems around you, the more that those beings know that your presence is safe. Because when we de-center focus on healing, what we're actually doing is we're telling people around us and ecosystems and all the inhabitants of the spaces around us that we are unsafe, that we are going to hurt them. When we are not actively focused on healing, we are actively hurting those around us. And I think for each individual, as we go on this most difficult journey of reconnecting with what healing means for each of us, keeping that in mind, keeping that central and at the forefront of our practices is essential to us continuing to do the work. Because when we harm one another by decentering focus on our own healing, we're actually enacting colonialism. We're actually perpetuating colonialism onto our environments, because colonialism necessitates that harm. Colonialism ensures that harm and ensures that we do not have healing practices and that we're not focused on our healing, that we are distracted by everything and in between around healing, so that we will effectively tear down our communities and each other and ourselves with the harm and the hurt that comes from within each of us. And that finds home and place within each of us. And in that way, I think I like to say, you know, especially with my Indigenous healing practices, which I'm so grateful and so privileged to be reconnected with, you know, in many different ways. You know, I have a long way to go, but a lot of that has been given to me thanks to, you know, the elders that have found their way to me via spirit. But it's actually in our way, you know, to consider the pain that dwells within us, especially from colonial harm, as, you know, removing that pain as, you know, an exorcism and treating it that way. Because actually moving away from behaviors that have been caused by colonial harm is actually undoing systemic oppression. It's actually undoing systemic violence within ourselves. These things are very, very multi-pronged. They are very complex. And it's important that, you know, in the sense of complexity, that we don't consider it something unreachable, but we consider it something that is to be taken apart slowly. That we consider it something that is to be dissolved very slowly and intentionally. That we approach it as something, you know, we approach it with reverence. We approach something of complexities with reverence. That we don't understand it fully yet. That we don't have all the tools to, you know, fully unpack it yet. And it's with that submitting to, you know, something that feels larger than ourselves that we do heal as well. So, you know, understanding that the first step of healing is actually admitting that you don't know what to do, but that you do need help. That's how I'm feeling like I'm doing that work of balancing.
Thank you so much, Ganesha. Yeah, thank you so much. What do other folks think about this? How do y'all get that, pay attention to, and how do you maintain your intention around this balance?
I can go. I think, thank you, Ganesha, for saying all of that. Absolutely. Realizing when you don't have it all together is key for me. I think too, like when I just realized, you know, like I'm an older sibling, you know, so a lot of responsibility was put on me. And like, sometimes I'm like, you know what, you don't have to be the responsible one all the time. You know, you can actually like fuck up if you want and like, you know, get yourself together if you need, like really giving myself a chance to make mistakes, you know, and really just being nice to myself, like, you know, just treating myself like you know, I give people pep talks all the time, but like, when do I give myself that pep talk? You know, when am I leaning on myself and giving myself that encouragement, that reassurance, that affirmation that, you know, either everything's going to be okay or everything's not okay. You know, it's okay to not be okay, you know, and to really check in with yourself. You know, my mom told me one time, I'm going to get a little bit emotional, but she said, start talking to yourself. You know, like honestly, like start talking to yourself, like literally being like, hey girl, what's up? You know, it might seem off or whatever, or weird, but like literally check in with yourself and talk to yourself in real time as if you would with someone else, and like check in with yourself and really be like, did you eat? You know, like, did you, someone called it, I forgot their name and I feel so bad, but they called it, yeah, like, you know, that mundane, you know, acts of service. Like, yeah, did you shower? Did you brush your teeth? You know, like, did you do all the things to take care of yourself to make sure, you know, you want to be however, or did you not shower? Did you just sit in your funk and just let that take over? You know what I mean? There's always balance, right? And so really just treating myself like, you know, again, like treating myself kind, talking to myself nice. You know, we are our worst critics, you know, especially when we're striving for things like perfection. And, you know, another amazing trans woman, Black trans woman, Deja Baptiste, you know, told me also that, you know, we miss out on our best work, you know, trying to strive for perfection. You know, we miss out on our best actualizations and best lessons and best whatever by just trying to be perfect all the time. You know, like, yes, perfection is amazing, but like, do you, you know, like, you know, like, can we be imperfect, whatever that means, you know, flaws and all, as Beyonce would say. You know, just, yeah, when do we just give ourselves that love, even when we feel we don't deserve it? You know, even when we feel like, you know, we need to, you know, do more. Like, no, just give yourself some love. So like, I love my alone time. You know, I love talking to myself, writing and journaling, you know, and taking a bath and, you know, just sitting in silence, even just sitting in silence, listening to the world and seeing what's around me. There's construction on this side. There's someone screaming down there. You know, there's someone walking. Like, yeah, are you aware of the environment and where you're at in life and in space? You know, so like taking those times to pause is really something that I really try to do at least once a day. Like, have you stopped for yourself today? Did you do what you needed to do before doing something else for someone else? You know, did you tend to you? Did you say yes to you before saying yes to someone else? Oh, that's a big one, Randy. Oh my God. Oh, did I say yes to myself? Woo, before saying yes to someone else? I'm gonna cry. It's big. It's big. It's big. It's big. Thank you. I'm getting choked, but that's pretty much it.
I think that's so. Thank you so much, Ganesha. Thank you so much, Randy. That was so beautiful, because while you were speaking to everyone else, you were also speaking to my heart. I think, you know, moving out here to Turtle Island from the islands, there was such a big need for perfection, and also this this way of trying to measure up to people, especially being in spaces where, you know, English is not my first language. I don't use that as a crutch, but I also acknowledge that, you know, it's not my strength. So when you come into spaces where people are just so fluent and things just come out, you get intimidated and you feel inferior, right? But you push through. And so I think also there's this feeling of trying to measure up to that standard that's been set by folks in that space, or white people, period, that trans women from the Pacific always try to measure up to. And I think, Randy, you mentioned such a great point, like, it's okay to fuck up. It's okay for you to not be that way, because in your own way, you're very perfect. Embracing yourself. And so I've come to terms with that. It took me a while, but I'm here. And I feel like for so long, I've always wanted to, I was striving to be perfect in every aspect of my life. But the truth is, you can't. And I feel like balancing that out has I'm sorry. I think trying to balance that out has been difficult, right? But learning to choose me before others, learning to have myself be priority, um, has not only been challenging, but also very rewarding in the end. It's not often you hear of Samoan trans women putting themselves, because it's always thought as, oh, you're selfish. Oh, how dare you put yourself before your clan, or how dare you put yourself before the people you serve? You're here to be served. You're here to serve them, and what are you doing? Putting yourself first. But really, I can't operate out of an empty vessel. So unless this vessel is full of joy and full of love and full of everything that you seek, I think you're just going to have to wait while I do me. And so that's the attitude that I've taken on in doing this work. To be quite honest, it's kept me going this long without a burnout, because that balance is already created there. Initially coming into doing this work and working with people whose relationships with you intersect so closely was one of the biggest challenges in my life. And honest, I'd be going home crying, like, how could I do this? And throwing myself a pity party, when really the issue was, you never chose yourself, Ara. And so to anyone out there who is, wanting to do community work, and also like just with all this hype, know that when you do this work, you also have to choose yourself first. Heart is always for community, but also choose yourself first, because in choosing yourself first and getting yourself healthy first, you're able to help others. Otherwise, we just be like the blind leading the blind. Right. So we want to be able to assist people. We want to be able to assist community the best way we can. And that only happens when we prioritize ourselves first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those are such beautiful responses, everybody. Sorry. I'm sorry, Malcolm. I was just going to jump right in there. Is that okay? Or did you want to say something? It's okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. But yeah, those are beautiful responses, everybody. I am tearing up right now because I feel like I was really meant to hear these words tonight, because I think I've also been in a place where I've been feeling a lot of burnout. And I think like when you're involved in community work, it can kind of be like the inevitable, like it's just going to happen one day if you don't have like set boundaries in place. And I think that's like kind of what I've been hearing from a lot of y'all today, especially you, Ada. It's like having just having a healthy distance, like physically and mentally, between the work that you're doing, so you can prioritize yourself first. Because I think a lot of us who are involved in this work just care so much. It's work that directly impacts our lives and our identities, and so we want to give like 100% into it all the time. But you do have to put yourself first. You have to prioritize your health and also like your finances too. I have heard so many folks who stay in like really like just bad jobs that are like community based, but they don't get paid, they don't get breaks, their hours are horrible, and I'm just like, leave. Because they're like, I care so much, but I get that you care, but you also have to care about yourself at the end of the day too. You have to like find an environment and curate a space where you can heal and you can pleasure yourself, whether it's like masturbation or watching your favorite show or eating your favorite food. You have to find like these pleasures in life, to get those serotonin going naturally, like in your brain. And you have to, I really love that you brought up Ganesha healing. I think that's such an important part of this. Some things that I do personally with the land is I like to go out and I like to dig a hole in the dirt and just like scream everything that I'm feeling into the ground, it up, and then know that the earth is holding that pain with me, holding that trauma with me, that I'm not in this alone. Another thing too, I'm reading this book called Jambalaya. I'm forgetting the author's name right now, but she's a really beautiful African Indigenous woman who has reconnected with her spirituality in really beautiful ways. And a tip that she has as well is like getting a paper plate and like drawing a sad face on it, tying it to the back of your head, screaming all the negative things that you're feeling in that moment while looking at yourself in the mirror. And then once you're done with that, take the paper plate off and burn it. Just release all of those emotions that you're feeling. Because I think that's a thing that is really ingrained in our society too. Like Ganesha, you were bringing up silence before, and I think that like specifically for communities of color and queer community of colors, like we don't really ever talk about how we're feeling and like the trauma that we're experiencing, because we don't have the space to, or the platforms to, or the access to have therapists to talk about that. And so just releasing all of those feelings, I think, is a really important thing to that too. And also, Ganesha, I just love a lot of things that you're saying, so I'm gonna like use this as a lot of key points to what I'm sharing right now. But I love that you brought up that rabbit and how it was playing in your yard, like by itself. I think play is such an important thing to finding that balance too. I don't think we play enough. I think play is something that we're like, oh, kids do that, like recess, whatever. And then when we grow up, you know, there isn't a space to play. It's just all work all the time. And so I think that like play in that image, I just keep thinking of that rabbit, just like having such a good time, but playing and connecting with like your inner child that's always with you is a really, really important part of that healing process and finding that balance and avoiding burnout. So whether playing again is like playing with yourself or playing with other people, or, you know, creating a game that you do in your daily life, I think is really important. You know, remember to hug yourself and to, if you have the resources, I would really, you know, suggest therapy. I know it's hard to find like a culturally responsive and culturally relevant therapist, but if you can find one and you have access to that, do that. And to folks watching, I think another way that you can support people who are doing community work, if you have like access to generational wealth, if you're white and your parents, you know, like have like a savings account that is, you know, very much so connected to slavery and land theft, you know, pay people directly, give them the money so they can have the financial security in order to rest and to heal and to connect with their communities in a way that they wouldn't have to, because they've been working, because they've been doing this work. We've always been doing this work. So yeah, I think Randy brought this up before, but like pay that money, you know, reparations, like pay that money to us now, because we need that. We don't have, especially for Black and Indigenous folks, we don't have like, you know, a safety net in order to take that time to heal. And it can be a privilege for some. So if you have those resources, share them. And, you know, let's all just, it's healing can also be like a collective thing too. It takes a village, you know, as an African proverb would say, it takes a village. So we all have to do this together and support one another. So, yeah. Thank you.
Beautiful, 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 Mahkyra. OMG. Like, again, the words, the power, the everything. Everyone has said so many great things today. I just want to come back and just to address just a calling in moment. And for any moment also that we didn't catch, in case that we said something that was a little bit of a nice, nasty or ableist language. But blind leading the blind does not need to equate ignorance leading ignorance, or not having knowledge leading not having knowledge. We love our blind elders. Thank you, Malcolm, for saying that. Absolutely. We love our blind elders and our blind communities, and any communities as well that we use language against them in derogatory ways. Let's think about other words that we can use, because words do mean things and they do have origins that are also colonial and very oppressive and very dangerous and have killed people. So we just want to definitely acknowledge that. But beautiful, beautiful words, everyone. And that was for me as well too. So yes, absolutely. Thank you all so much for just, this is the best way to do a Thursday. Like, this is the best dinner, you know? Thank you, just thank you. I'm so full.
I just want to say, sorry.
Oh, please, go ahead.
I just want to say super quick that I like 100% with that, and that etymology and, you know, discovering the etymology of words, the origin of words, is actually central to decolonization. And it's something that, like, you know, all of us who are, you know, able to access that knowledge and adapt it should be doing 100%, because our connection to words, our connection to this colonial language, right, and naming it as colonial is how we actually reconnect with one another and ourselves and our communities through decolonization. It's how we get back to our original languages and our actual, you know, modes of speaking that are also nonverbal that I mentioned earlier. And it's how we, you know, for those of you who, like, you know, when I was speaking about psychic communication, might have felt disconnected from that, or feeling like something like that is unreachable for you. That's one of the ways in which you reconnect with psychic communication as well, is, you know, getting back to Indigenous ways of communicating, of nonverbal, of, you know, mind to mind, heart to heart communication. I know, like, for instance, like in Samoan, I was very privileged to have a Samoan teacher at some point in my journey who taught me about, you know, like one of the Samoan ways of communicating or of acknowledging or honoring another person, of, like, you know, pressing like heart to heart or head to head or, you know, eye to eye, and having like that visual communication of just the eyes, and how much information is present just within the eyes alone. Imperative. So yeah, please, like, continue the work, everybody, on those intimate forms of communication, of cultivating intimacy and oneness with one another, and remembering that all of our languages right now are either colonial in origin, or they're in a response to colonialism, because colonialism has actually very actively attempted to eradicate our Indigenous languages. Holding on to them, learning your Indigenous languages, and being able to pass those on to future generations is key to, you know, uplifting our communities and our individual tribes and clans and cultures and nations, the world around.
Thank you. In that exact spirit, I have so much gratitude. We have so much gratitude for you all who are tuning in, for joining us. So much gratitude for the partner organizations in this coalition for funding and making our gathering possible. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for just the brilliance that you all bring in your daily lives, behind the scenes, behind the curtains, and especially in these last 2 hours together. So I guess the last thing to say is Ofalahi atu, chi miigwech, tlaso kamati. Thank you. Jambo, thank you, right? Indigenous languages that we can express gratitude in. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your nights, and please take all the words that you've heard to heart and use them in the future.